I'm going to talk about the business culture in Guatemala. And this is really fascinating. There's a lot of good studies and a lot of good stuff written about why business cultures get a certain way. And I don't typically go into that because I'm talking about it from a very specific perspective of how to sell to people, okay, or how to manage a sales force. And I don't want to get tied down and go down a bunny trail. But here's the thing. Guatemala really stands out in the Western Hemisphere. And when you take a look at the difference in culture between Guatemala and Costa Rica, for instance, it's really interesting, even though they're not that far apart. And theoretically, they should be very similar. And how did this end up this way? I'm not going to go down that, but there's a lot of really good material about things like how the Mayan culture and the Spanish influences and so on created situations that have influenced the culture. But three things that really stand out. In the Western Hemisphere, the level of power differential acceptance that you're going to find in Guatemala is higher than any place else, right? Very, very interesting. What that means is people here are very accepting of the idea that some people are elite and some people aren't, and that's just the way the world works. And even in other Latin American countries, for the most part, it's much lower than it is in Guatemala. Guatemala is as high as, for instance, Saudi Arabia. Very interesting. The second thing is avoidance of uncertainty, okay? Highest level in the Western Hemisphere. And then the third thing, which again is the highest level in the Western Hemisphere, is collectivism. Lowest level of individualism in the Western Hemisphere, which is really, really interesting, okay? So Guatemalans in a lot of ways, for instance, are going to be like the Japanese, where very high level of acceptance of power differential, very high level of collectivism, very low level of individuality, with the avoidance of uncertainty being even higher here. So this is a very, very unusual, it's almost an Asian culture in a lot of ways. Now, what does that mean for you in terms of sales? When you're dealing with individualism, that typically impacts what drives a salesperson and what drives a purchasing person to make the decisions they do and how they do it, okay? Because a purchasing person will definitely not make a decision by themselves. They will get other people involved. They will make it a group decision. So you have to keep that in mind. Even if you're dealing with somebody who seems to be the right person to deal with, they are going to want to discuss this with other people. Same thing with salespeople here. They might not be looking at this as something where they're going to make their own decisions. They might want to be guided more, to be told what to do more, or to be part of a collective decision more, okay? Which, as Americans, we're typically not used to that from a perspective of what salespeople want in the way they act. So keep that in mind. Individualism, which for an American business person, American sales manager, very often we correlate sales ability with individualism. That isn't always the case. But it can impact what drives a person, what motivates a person, and how they make decisions. Avoidance of uncertainty is something else that is interesting on how it impacts sales, okay? Because what that means is that people would like more information. They don't want to make a decision on their own. They would like material to back them up. So the people in Guatemala are going to ask you for more material than somebody else might ask. They might ask for more reference sites. They might ask for more citations. They will certainly not want to be the first person to do it. Avoidance of uncertainty correlates well with xenophobia, with mistrust. So people might very well mistrust you as a foreigner, as a gringo, and really need to work with somebody local who they trust and have a relationship with. So you have to keep that in mind. The avoidance of uncertainty is going to impact your ability to sell, and in terms of salespeople and a sales team, when a salesperson or an employee in general has a strong avoidance of uncertainty, that means They are not going to want to change jobs. They're going to want lifetime employment as close as possible to it. They're going to want to know that they're part of a group. Now, when you take avoidance of uncertainty and an extremely low level of individualism, you're going to find employees who really want to be part of a family, told what to do, have a feeling that they're part of a group, etc. And the question is, can you provide them this framework should you decide to employ Guatemalan salespeople? The issue in terms of power differential, well, think of that as, well, who's going to decide? And when you take this is interesting because it's very common in Japan as well. It's the same thing in Japan, where you have a very high level of power differential acceptance, and you also have a very high level of collectivism. So you would think that the boss makes the decision, and in the end, maybe the boss does make the decision, but the boss will then discuss it with other people. The expectation is that there will be a group discussion. People will get involved. Nobody wants to say that they made a decision alone, even though the big guy might be making the decision alone. Likewise, if you have salespeople working for you, they will probably want you to tell them what to do. They will want you to discuss it with them. They will want to feel part of the group, but they're looking for a lot more guidance and a lot more being ordered around than possibly an American. So very interesting. Even though we're so close to Guatemala, this is the country that is farthest away from being an American business culture in the Western Hemisphere. And it's even far away from the Costa Rican and the Mexican business cultures. Very interesting example of how a business culture can be different just over a difference of a few miles. Remember, when you're ready to grow your international sales, reach out to us. We can help.
When you decide it's time to grow your international sales, call us.